On August 23, 2010, Rolando Mendoza stepped onto a tourist bus in Manila, carrying an M16 rifle. The 55-year-old former police captain had been dismissed from the force 2 years earlier on extortion charges. Now he wanted his job back, and 25 people from Hong Kong were about to become his bargaining chips. The bus had just left Fort Santiago when Mendoza boarded near Carino Grandstand. He wore his old police uniform and carried a handwritten sign taped to the rifle that read, "Big mistake to correct." Within minutes, he'd taken control of the vehicle and ordered the driver to keep the engine running while he sealed the exits. The tourists had been on a 3-day package tour. These weren't random selections. Mendoza had specifically chosen a bus full of foreign tourists for maximum media attention. By 9:30 a.m., police had surrounded the bus. Mendoza released 9 hostages almost immediately, 3 Filipino photographers, a mother with her 3 children, and 2 other passengers. He kept 15 Hong Kong tourists and the Filipino driver. The released hostages told police that Mendoza claimed he'd been framed in the extortion case. He wanted the ombudsman to review his dismissal, and he wanted it done that day. Mendoza's brother, Gregorio, also a police officer, arrived to help negotiate. Mendoza passed notes through the bus window, listing his demands, reinstatement to the police force, restoration of his benefits, and a formal apology from the ombudsman's office. The Philippine National Police began what they thought would be standard crisis negotiations. For hours, nothing happened. Mendoza occasionally spoke with the negotiators through the driver's side window. He allowed food and drinks to be delivered to the hostages. Local television stations set up cameras and began broadcasting live footage of the bus. Around 1:30 p.m., Mendoza saw himself on the bus's television monitor. The live coverage showed police snipers getting into position. He ordered the driver to move the bus away from its original position, then demanded all media leave the area. The networks refused. Instead, they kept the cameras rolling. The ombudsman's office sent a letter that supposedly met Mendoza's demands. When he read it, he discovered it was unsigned and non-binding, just a piece of paper with vague promises. Mendoza handcuffed the driver to the steering wheel and became increasingly agitated. Negotiators could hear him shouting at the hostages. At 6 p.m., Mendoza issued a deadline. If his demands weren't met within 15 minutes, he would start killing hostages. The deadline passed. No shots were fired, but police decided to arrest Gregorio Mendoza, who had been assisting with negotiations. The arrest happened in full view of the media's cameras. Rolando Mendoza watched on the bus's TV as police wrestled his brother to the ground and shoved him in the patrol car. Gregorio's 10-year-old son was also caught in the scuffle, crying as officers pushed him aside. Rolando started screaming. Passengers who'd been released earlier reported that Mendoza had repeatedly said he would die before returning to prison. Now he was watching his brother get arrested for trying to help him. At 7:35 p.m., the first gunshot cracked through the air. Tour guide Masase had tried to escape through the rear exit. Mendoza shot him in the head. His body fell onto the bus steps, blocking the door. 10 minutes later, more shots went off. The remaining hostages were screaming. Police tried to storm the bus at 7:50 p.m. The assault team approached with sledgehammers and tried to break the windows, but the safety glass wouldn't shatter properly, and they brought the wrong equipment. As officers fumbled with the reinforced glass, Mendoza opened fire on the hostages at close range. One hostage watched Mendoza shoot his wife through the neck. When he tried to shield his daughters, Mendoza shot him in the head, then turned the rifle on the 2 girls. They were both shot multiple times. Another woman received a bullet through her jaw that traveled down into her chest. Another was shot in the neck and shoulder. Mendoza moved through the bus systematically. He shot one hostage in the head at point-blank range, while the man was handcuffed to his seat, and he shot another twice in the head. He then shot a 14-year-old boy as he tried to protect his sister. The boy's father also took bullets to the head and wrist trying to stop Mendoza. The police finally breached the bus at 8:15 p.m. A sniper put a bullet through Mendoza's head as he fired out the window. When officers entered, they found bodies slumped between seats and blood pooling on the floor, and also survivors playing dead among the corpses. By the end of it all, 8 tourists were dead. The television cameras had broadcast the entire assault live. Viewers in Hong Kong watched their family members die in real time. They saw police sledgehammers bouncing uselessly off the windows. They saw officers taking cover while gunfire erupted inside the bus. They also saw a tactical team member who accidentally shot himself in the foot during the breach. The Philippine government's investigation revealed catastrophic failures. The assault team had no protective shields. Their radios didn't work properly, they had no bus assault training, the negotiators had never handled a major hostage situation, and nobody had thought to cut the bus's television antennas to prevent Mendoza from watching the police response live. The rescue operation took 11 hours from start to finish. Every tactical decision the police made was broadcast on live television where Mendoza could watch it. The networks showed sniper positions, police movements, and the arrest of his brother. They turned a hostage negotiation into a televised spectacle that the hijacker could monitor in real time. Some survivors reported that Mendoza had seemed calm until he saw his brother's arrest on TV. Others said he'd been looking for an excuse to start shooting from the beginning. One of the victim's sisters later testified that Mendoza had specifically targeted families, shooting parents in front of their children and children in front of their parents. The tour bus still exists today. The government turned it into a memorial, moving it from its original location to a police station. The bullet holes in the seats were left untouched, and bloodstains are being preserved. Every year on August 23rd, survivors and family members gather in Hong Kong to light incense for those who died watching themselves on television. Trapped in a bus with a man who wanted his job back and was willing to go to extreme lengths just to do that. After Mendoza's death, an investigation into his dismissal was reopened. The review found he had indeed been guilty of extortion. The evidence against him had been solid, and his claims of being framed were false. 8 people died for a reinstatement that was never going to happen. On January 18, 1993, Emilio Nunez called the Spanish-language television show HORRIFYING and asked them to meet him at Our Lady Queen of Heaven Cemetery in North Lauderdale, Florida. He wanted to tell them about his daughter. Nunez had a story he thought people needed to hear. His 15-year-old daughter, Yuandra, had killed herself on Thanksgiving Day, less than 2 months earlier. She did this after discovering she was 13 weeks pregnant. In a note she left, she wrote that she couldn't be the daughter her mother wanted her to be. Reporter Ingrid Cruz and cameraman Jorge Delgado arrived at the cemetery that Monday morning to interview Nunez at his daughter's grave. Nunez was already there, holding a bouquet of flowers. As Delgado started filming, Nunez knelt by the fresh grave and began talking about his daughter. He placed the flowers on the headstone while Cruz asked him questions about what had happened. Nunez told Cruz that his ex-wife, Martiza Martin, was responsible for Yuandra's death. He claimed Martin had been abusive. He said their daughter had been terrified of her mother. The divorce had given Martin custody, and according to Nunez, that decision had killed their child. Cruz kept the interview going, getting Nunez to elaborate on his accusations, while Delgado kept the camera rolling. About 10 minutes into the interview, Nunez suddenly stood up and pointed towards the cemetery entrance. His ex-wife had just driven through the gates. Martin had come to visit her daughter's grave, not knowing the television crew would be there. She parked her car near the gravesite and sat inside, watching her ex-husband being interviewed. While Delgado kept filming, Cruz walked over to Martin's car and started knocking on the window. She wanted to get Martin's side of the story, but Martin stayed in her car with the windows rolled up, refusing to respond. Cruz kept knocking. She kept asking questions through the glass such as, "What happened to your daughter? Why did she die? What do you have to say about your ex-husband's accusations?" Martin sat silently, staring straight ahead. Cruz wouldn't give up. She needed Martin to say something, anything that would give balance to the story. After several minutes of this, Martin finally opened her car door. She stepped out, looked at Nunez's license plate, wrote down the number, and turned toward her daughter's grave. She still hadn't said a word to Cruz. Cruz followed her, continuing to pepper her with questions. Martin walked slowly toward the headstone, ignoring Cruz completely. The camera was still rolling. Delgado had moved to a better angle, keeping both women in frame as they approached the grave. That's when Nunez left the scene and walked back to his vehicle. Nobody paid attention to him. Cruz was focused on Martin, still trying to get her to speak. Delgado was focused on keeping the shot steady, and Martin was focused on her daughter's grave, where she'd been trying to mourn in peace. None of them saw Nunez reach into his car. He came back with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Martin had her back to him, still walking toward the grave, with Cruz beside her. Nunez stood over her body and kept firing. The second shot went into her back. He emptied the entire clip into his ex-wife's body while she lay on the cemetery ground. Some reports say he fired 5 or 6 times. The camera caught all of it. Cruz started screaming. She ran towards the news van while Delgado kept the camera pointed at the scene. He filmed Nunez standing over Martin's body, gun still in hand. The footage shows Nunez wasn't rushing. After finishing the shooting, he stood there for a moment, looking down at his ex-wife's body. She was lying just feet from her daughter's grave. He'd shot her in front of a television camera in broad daylight, with 2 witnesses who documented everything. The police arrived within minutes, and Nunez didn't run. He was still at the cemetery when they arrested him. with the murder weapon being recovered at the scene. The television crew handed over their footage immediately. There was no question about what had happened. The entire murder had been captured from start to finish. Throughout the interview at his daughter's grave, while he talked about his pain and blamed his ex-wife for their child's death, he'd invited news crew there knowing what he planned to do. When investigators reviewed the footage frame by frame, they could see the exact moment Nunez made his decision. When Martin's car appeared in the cemetery, his demeanor changed. He became agitated, started pointing, then calmly walked to his vehicle. The interview had been a setup. He'd wanted cameras there when he killed her. Martin left behind an 18-month-old son from another relationship. After the murder, investigators learned more about the family's history. The custody battle had been bitter. Both parents had made accusations against each other. Joandra's note suggested she felt caught between them, unable to meet either parent's expectations while dealing with an unplanned pregnancy at 15. The footage aired on CO.AG that same week. Spanish-language television had never broadcast anything like it before. The murder became one of the most shocking pieces of television ever captured, showing a man executing his ex-wife over their daughter's grave, while a reporter tried to interview her. At trial, Nunez's defense tried to argue that Joandra's death had driven him temporarily insane. They said grief had overwhelmed his judgment. The prosecution had the video. They showed the jury how Nunez had planned the entire event, calling the news station, arranging the interview, concealing the weapon, and waiting for his ex-wife to arrive. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder in 2000, 7 years after the killing. He served his time at facilities across Florida. Prison records show he was released in 2018 after serving 25 years. On June 13, 1982, 23-year-old Riccardo Paletti was competing in the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal. This was on his second Formula One start, and his mother Gianna was watching from the grandstand. They were planning to celebrate his 24th birthday in 2 days. Paletti had been racing for just 4 years. His father, a wealthy Milanese real estate developer, had bankrolled his son's rapid climb through the motorsport. Before cars, Riccardo had been an Italian junior karate champion at 13. He'd also nearly made the national alpine skiing team, but racing became his obsession, and his father's money made it possible. The problem was, Paletti wasn't really ready for Formula One. He'd joined Osella for the 1982 season, and in his first 6 attempts, he'd only managed to qualify once. That was at Imola, where a boycott meant only 14 cars started. Even then, his car wouldn't fire up for the warm-up lap, and he'd started the race 49 seconds behind everyone else. Detroit should have been his first real start, but he crashed in warm-up and couldn't take the grid. Now in Montreal, he'd finally qualified properly, 23rd out of 26 cars, but he'd still made it. The race was being broadcast live around the world. Formula One had already lost Gilles Villeneuve 5 weeks earlier at Zolder. The track had been renamed in his honor. Nobody expected to witness another death so soon. The lights stayed red for an unusually long time. On pole position, Didier Pironi's Ferrari lurched forward twice, then stalled completely. Pironi raised his hand to signal the problem, but the lights turned green before anyone could aboard the start. 25 cars accelerated toward the first corner, while Pironi sat motionless. The cars at the front swerved around him, then the midfield drivers. Raoul Bassel's March clipped the Ferrari's left rear wheel, sending his car airborne before landing right side up. Jochen Mass and Alicio Salazar made minor contact, but kept going. It looked like everyone had made it through. Paletti was starting from row 12 near the back. By the time he reached Pironi's stalled Ferrari, the track was full of cars taking evasive action. There was nowhere to go. The telemetry later showed his engine was running 10,500 RPM when he hit Pironi's car squarely in the back. The impact speed was approximately 110 miles per hour. The force launched Pironi's Ferrari across the track, where Jeff Lee's hit it again, but Paletti's Osella took the worst of it. The entire front half of the car collapsed. The nose section crumpled back into the cockpit, crushing Paletti's legs and pinning him against the steering wheel. His chest took massive trauma from the impact of the wheel. Pironi jumped out of his damaged Ferrari and ran toward the Osella. Professor Sid Watkins, Formula One's medical chief, arrived within seconds. Paletti was unconscious, slumped forward in what remained of his cockpit. Watkins climbed onto the wreckage to check Paletti's condition. That's when the fuel ignited. The Osella had started the race with full tanks. The impact had ruptured the fuel system, spraying gasoline across the hot engine components and track surface. As Watkins reached for Paletti, flames erupted around the car. The fire spread instantly, creating a wall of orange that forced everyone back. Television cameras captured the inferno engulfing the car, with Paletti still trapped inside.
And the car's caught fire. The driver is still in the car. They're going to get onto the job right now. He's got a medical air supply in there. They're getting the firefighting onto it. They're trying to get it out. They're getting the fire under control. Come on, lads, get more fire in there. More extinguishers. Get in there. Yes, this is going to be difficult because there's 40 gallons of fuel in that car. The driver is obviously trapped in the car. They're approaching the driver now. One of his mechanics has come over. Didi Pironi is getting a fire extinguisher. He's getting into the fire. Didi Pironi in the lead overalls there trying to direct one of the fire officials. This is the start of the race, the very first lap. Remember, the car's only left the starting grid. An enormous amount of smoke, toxics around there, potentially very dangerous.
We don't know which of Charrier or Paletti are the two. It's Paletti, I believe, that is in the car.
The car looks as if there's still flame there. I hope somebody has pressed his medical air supply.
Paletti, I believe, is the driver in the Oscilla. Paletti, the Italian driver, is in that car. They have now apparently
doused most of the flames. They're still working on it because there's not only fuel in there, there's also oil, so it's no easy matter to get that out.
Now the yellow flag is out. This race has not been stopped.
Yes, they have.
Yeah,
they've got a red flag out over at the far end of the circuit, and they're bringing the cars in.
Track marshals tried to attack the flames with extinguishers, but the fire kept reigniting. Every time they thought they had it controlled, fresh fuel would catch and the flames would surge again. The heat was so intense the rescue workers couldn't get close enough to extract Paletti. His fireproof suit protected him from burns, but he remained pinned in the wreckage, while everyone watched helplessly. The extraction took 25 minutes. Rescue crews had to wait for the fire to be completely suppressed, then cut through the twisted aluminum and carbon fiber with power tools. The sparks from the cutting equipment threatened to reignite the spilled fuel, forcing them to work in short bursts. Television audiences watched the agonizing rescue efforts unfold in real time. When they finally pulled Paletti from the car, Dr. Bouchard, the track physician, noticed his pupils were already dilated. This indicated brain death had likely occurred at impact. The medical team loaded him into a helicopter and flew him to Royal Victoria Hospital, less than 10 minutes away, but there was nothing anyone could do. The autopsy revealed the full extent of Paletti's injuries. The steering column had crushed his chest on impact, tearing his aorta. Blood had flooded his chest cavity and stomach. Both legs were fractured in multiple places. The official cause of death was massive chest trauma. The fire, despite its dramatic appearance, hadn't caused any burns. Paletti had likely died within minutes of the initial impact, possibly before the flames even started. His mother watched it all happen. She saw her only child accelerate into a stationary car. She knew, before the helicopter even took off, that her son was gone. The race was restarted after an hour delay. Nelson Piquet won, giving BMW their first Formula One victory, but nobody celebrated. Pironi was devastated, blaming himself even though his stalled engine wasn't his fault. The television footage was analysed endlessly. Frame by frame, people watched Paletti's approach, looking for any sign he tried to avoid the collision. There was none. He'd simply driven straight into Pironi's car at full racing speed. Some questioned whether Paletti had frozen under pressure. Others pointed out that from his position at the back, with cars swerving everywhere, he might not have seen Pironi until it was too late. The onboard cameras that would have answered these questions didn't exist yet. All anyone had was the external footage of a young driver accelerating into catastrophe. The investigation revealed multiple failures. The start lights had malfunctioned, staying red too long. There was no system to abort the start when Pironi stalled. The extraction equipment wasn't designed for this type of crash, and the fuel tank design allowed massive spillage in high-speed impacts. But none of these factors would have mattered if Paletti had managed to avoid the stationary Ferrari. The Oscilla team continued for a few more years, but never recovered from losing their driver in such horrific circumstances. Paletti's sponsorship money disappeared with him. His father, who had reportedly been planning to create a new Formula One team for his son in 1983, withdrew from motorsport entirely. The Canadian Grand Prix continued to be held at the same circuit. The start-finish line was eventually moved away and safety improvements were implemented, but for 12 years, until Roland Ratzenberger's death in 1994, Paletti remained Formula One's last race weekend fatality. On October 13, 2008, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, 15-year-old Eloa Cristina Pimentel came home from school with her 3 friends to work on a class project. Her best friend, Naira da Silva was there, along with 2 boys from their class. They were sitting in her apartment when Lindenberg Alves kicked down the door. Lindenberg was 22 years old and Aloa's ex-boyfriend. They dated for nearly 3 years before she ended things, meaning she was only 12 years old when they got together. He couldn't accept the breakup. Now he stood in her doorway holding a pistol, pointing it at 4 terrified teenagers. Within minutes, every television camera in Brazil would be pointed at their 3rd floor window. The 2 boys were released almost immediately. Lindenberg kept Aloa and Naira. Police arrived and established a perimeter around the building, while GATE, Brazil's Special Tactical Actions Group, took over negotiations. Television crews set up across the street. Their first aerial shots appeared on the evening news. Viewers could see the apartment window, where Lindenberg occasionally appeared, sometimes with his gun visible. By day 2, every major news network in Sao Paulo had crews at the scene. The standoff became the lead story on every channel. Ratings spiked. Television helicopters circled the building constantly, broadcasting live footage of police positions, sniper locations, and tactical movements. Lindenberg watched it all on the television inside the apartment. The media coverage turned into a feeding frenzy. Reporters called the apartment's landline repeatedly, trying to get interviews. They contacted Lindenberg's family, Aloa's family, neighbors, anyone with a connection to the story. The networks competed to see who could get closest to the action. On October 15th, day 3 of the siege, ReTV's afternoon show, A Tarde é Sua, managed to reach Lindenberg by phone. The show's host, Sonia Abreu, had her reporters track down the apartment's phone number. They called, and Lindenberg answered. He agreed to a recorded interview with reporter Luis Guerra. After watching that segment air on television, Lindenberg called back. He wanted to go live. He said he was worried Brazil thought he was a criminal. He wanted to explain himself to the nation. The show's director told Abreu that Lindenberg was on the line. She took the call on air. For 30 minutes, Abreu interviewed Lindenberg live while he held 2 teenagers hostage. The conversation was broadcast nationally. Abreu's show, which normally averaged 2 points in the ratings, hit 5 points during the interview. She asked him about his feelings, his motivations, and why he was doing this. She spoke to Aloa too, briefly, before Lindenberg cut her off. During the call, Abreu and Lindenberg discussed a possible surrender. He said he would walk out with Aloa, she would carry his unloaded guns, and he would put his hands up behind her, but he wouldn't say when. The police negotiator, Captain Adriano Giovanni, later testified that this interview was not positive for the negotiations. While Lindenberg talked to television, police couldn't reach him. The interview changed everything. Lindenberg now understood he had a national audience. A commentator on Abreu's show said on air that he was rooting for Aloa and Lindenberg to get married, to work things out. He said this while a 15-year-old girl was being held at gunpoint by her adult ex-boyfriend. The comment aired to millions of viewers. By day 4, negotiations had stalled. Police made a decision that would prove catastrophic. They asked Naira, who had been released earlier, to return to the apartment to help. They wanted her to negotiate with Lindenberg to convince him to let Aloa go. Naira was 15 years old. She'd already been traumatized by 3 days as a hostage, but police sent her back. According to Naira's testimony, police told her to go to the 2nd floor but not to approach the apartment door. She was supposed to stay at a safe distance, with officers protecting her. Instead, when she reached the 2nd floor landing, she was alone. The apartment door opened. Lindenberg stood there with his gun pointed at Aloa's head. Aloa reached out her hand to Naira. Her friend took it. Lindenberg pulled both girls inside and slammed the door. Now he had 2 hostages again. The police had given him a bargaining chip that he'd already surrendered. Naira would later testify that she was essentially used as bait without protection. The siege continued into its 100th hour, officially the longest hostage situation in Sao Paulo state history. Lindenberg grew increasingly agitated, switching between calm negotiations and violent threats. On day 5, GATE decided to storm the apartment. They claimed they heard gunshots from inside, though this was disputed. The tactical team breached the door and entered. In the chaos that followed, Lindenberg fired his weapon. He shot Aloa twice, once in the head and once in the groin. He also shot Naira in the face. The television cameras captured the police assault in real time. Viewers watched tactical officers rushing in, heard the gunshots, and saw the ambulances arrive. They watched paramedics carry out 2 teenage girls covered in blood. Naira was conscious, her face destroyed but alive. Aloa was unconscious, with a bullet lodged in her brain. Both girls were rushed to the hospital. Naira would survive, though she needed extensive facial reconstructive surgery. Aloa was declared brain dead the next day. She was taken off life support, while news cameras broadcast from outside the hospital. Her organs were donated to several people. The interference with police negotiations, particularly Abreu's interview, was widely condemned by security experts, but Abreu never apologized. Years later, she said she would, quote, do it all again. She claimed her journalistic experience helped her handle the conversation appropriately. She said Lindenberg himself testified that he only thought about surrendering after talking to her. She presented this as a vindication rather than acknowledging that her interference might have prolonged the siege. During Lindenberg's trial in 2012, prosecutors argued that media interference contributed to the tragedy. The defense tried to blame the media for the length of the siege. Lindenberg was convicted on 12 counts and sentenced to 98 years and 10 months in prison, though Brazilian law capped his actual time at 30 years. During the trial, he showed no remorse. He maintained that Aloa's death was accidental and that he never meant to kill her. The Aloa Pimentel case exposed the worst aspects of Brazilian television journalism. Networks turned a hostage situation into a reality show. They broadcast tactical information that Lindenberg could watch. The police made catastrophic errors too. Allowing Nayara to return to the apartment was inexcusable. Letting the siege continue for 5 days while Lindenberg performed for television cameras was a tactical failure. The final assault was bungled, resulting in both hostages being shot. But these mistakes were amplified by the media circus surrounding the apartment. The whole incident was preserved on video. Brazil's longest hostage crisis transformed into 5 days of live television that ended with a 15-year-old girl shot in the head while millions watched. On June 13, 2013, in a small town called PO13 in Maranhão, Brazil, 20-year-old Otávio Jordão da Silva was refereeing a soccer game. It wasn't an official match, just a casual Sunday game where someone had to volunteer to be the referee. Da Silva had injured his foot and couldn't play, so he took up the role. About 30 minutes in, Da Silva gave 31-year-old player Josimir Santos Abreu a red card. Abreu refused to leave the field. They argued. According to witnesses, Abreu threw Da Silva onto the ground. When Da Silva stood up, he pulled out a knife he'd been carrying and stabbed Abreu in the chest. The blade punctured Abreu's lung. Other players tried to help him when someone called for an ambulance. Abreu died on the way to the hospital. Word spread through the crowd of spectators that he was dead. His friends and relatives were watching from the sidelines. They'd seen the stabbing happen. Now they knew Abreu was gone. The mob rushed the field. Da Silva was still there when they reached him. Luis Moraes de Souza smashed a bottle over Da Silva's head, then broke it across his face. Others began throwing stones at him. They tied his arms and legs while he was still conscious. A man only known as Pirolo grabbed the knife Da Silva had used to kill Abreu. While he lay bound on the ground, Pirolo stabbed him in the neck with his own weapon. The crowd kept stoning him until he stopped moving, but they weren't done. Francisco Moraes de Souza, Luis's brother, appeared with a sickle. He began cutting Da Silva's body apart on the field, first the arms, then the legs. The crowd watched while people recorded with their cell phones. Francisco then used the sickle to decapitate Da Silva. He picked up the severed head and mounted it on a wooden stake someone had driven into the middle of the field. The cell phone footage has since been lost, but it apparently showed the aftermath clearly. Da Silva's head on the stake, with his dismembered limbs scattered on the ground, and blood soaking into the dirt. And people could apparently be heard talking Portuguese in the video. Some sound shocked, others were explaining why it happened. There were even children there who saw all of it. By the time police arrived, it was over. They found Da Silva's head still displayed on the stake, with his quartered body around the field. Luis Moraes de Souza was arrested that day after being identified from the cell phone video. Police were still searching for Francisco and Pirolo. Prosecutors in Maranhão used the leaked footage as evidence. Regional Delegate Walter Costa said they were analyzing every frame to identify suspects. The video that horrified Brazil became the primary tool for prosecuting those involved. What happened that day wasn't just a fight that went wrong. The mob tied up Da Silva systematically. Someone brought a sickle, and someone even prepared a stake. The entire incident, from Abreu's stabbing to Da Silva's dismemberment, took less than an hour. Both men died over a red card dispute in an amateur game. Abreu because he wouldn't leave the field, and Da Silva because he bought a knife to settle an argument. The crowd that watched the soccer game that Sunday afternoon instead witnessed a stabbing, then participated in or watched a lynching and dismemberment. And that's the end of the video, folks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're new, and consider supporting me on Patreon. All patrons get early and free access to videos, and higher tiers get their name on the board and a shout out. Especially those whose names you're seeing on the screen now, particularly Helen Korn, Kyle, BAN, John, Brendan O'Connell, Adam Clayton, Count Lagula, Danny Jade, Paul Mendoza, Squishy, Alex Christmas, Bella Schwartz, Brody Millers, Belcy Gell, Stimulate, Incris Desarius, and of course, Dick the Cock Johnson and the Woodmaster of WrestleMania X69 or Maybe Not Dude. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.